Thank you very much, Ilias. I'd just like to start by saying I'm intrigued that I have the honour of being the last speaker here this evening, but also that I'm credited with the longest job title that I have ever had. So I feel quite honoured, but interestingly, it's only the second longest one on the programme. So I feel maybe I've been missing out a little bit. And one of the points that was made by Rovio, I'm really interested in that they like to refer to their customers as fans. And that reminded me of a story I heard many years ago now by the chief marketing officer of a motorcycle manufacturer based in the US. And he was talking about, the whole conference was about brand loyalty. So people were giving examples of what he did to earn brand loyalty. He said, no, none of that is brand loyalty. Let me tell you what brand loyalty is. When your customers permanently tattoo your brand on their bodies, that's brand loyalty. So Harley Davidson felt that they had the whole situation really sorted out. Now I noticed there are a couple of my colleagues here this evening come to keep an eye on me, make sure that I don't say anything that I shouldn't. So that's that bit of the speech gone, I'm afraid. But what I'd like to start by is by talking through a few examples of the practical implications of the regulation as it stands. So I'd like to start by saying that we've seen where the processing of personal data on both the large scale and a small scale is helping to provide innovative services to citizens around the world, and also to start providing answers to some of the pressing problems that we face as a society. Now, in the Digital Policy Alliance paper, you've already heard the outline there from my colleague. We're concerned that there are a wide range of benefits that come from the processing of personal data that may just be disrupted if the regulation were to come into effect as it's currently drafted, and also concerned that innovations that may be available or become available elsewhere in the world may just bypass Europe as a result. So I'm going to focus on some of these examples of some practical implications. You will have seen a number of publications which have taken a similar approach more latterly, and I'm going to try and be quite succinct on this. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the services available to citizens and businesses, and perhaps start by the provision of cybersecurity products and services. And this, to be honest, this is largely a data problem. It's tracking attacks that are taking place on networks, monitoring everything that's going on, filtering out what's important from what isn't, and identifying the source of attacks. And pretty much the most sophisticated protection we have for cybersecurity, and for that matter for spam filters in email, involves processing the personal data of the attackers. So what we don't need is for that data to be placed out of the reach of the organisations who are helping to protect against attack. But if we decide that there's a balance here and that data does need to be protected, then the implication of that is we may need to have to accept a different level of protection from cyber attack than perhaps we've become used to. I think that there's also some examples around services to users which you might identify with as individuals as well. So if you're going ordering products for delivery, then the personal data of the recipient will be used to decide how that product is delivered. There may be a third party involved who will be processing that personal data in order to deliver it most efficiently to your address. And that kind of works okay if the recipient is also the customer placing the order. Where it becomes somewhat more challenging is if I am placing an order for a product that I want to be delivered to someone else. So I may be buying a gift for them. And then we're stuck in a situation where the organisation delivering it has to process the personal data of someone with whom they have no relationship, and that the person whose personal data it is not expecting the delivery, therefore can't be in a position to give their informed consent to that delivery. So I think that's perhaps one example. Another is in the area when we move on to other offerings. A lot of countries in Europe are looking to roll out smart meters across their electricity consumers. So this becomes a critical component of most of our strategies for for implementing the smart energy revolution, so to help us as individuals reduce our energy consumption, and also to help us to manage and generate our power in new ways and distribute it more effectively. I think, too, here there's a balance to be struck, because my electricity consumption patterns are quite clearly my personal data. They can be associated to me by the meter, and they say things about me that is then going out into the public domain. So there is definitely a balance here between reassuring me about my data privacy, but also trying to fulfil the objectives for environmental and sustainability requirements that are leading us to these smart meter rollouts in the first place. Moving on from that, then I think there are a few other areas that I'd just like to talk about very quickly. We look at private organisations who are engaged in fighting fraud are also engaged in processing the personal data of the fraudsters that they may be trying to combat. So there is quite a good example in the UK of a website which sells used motor vehicles. So those of you from the UK will probably know who I'm talking about. And they put a lot of effort into tracking the personal details of people who are placing adverts, so they can build a profile of those individuals who come onto the website, advertise a fictitious vehicle for sale, sell it 10 times over to different people, and then disappear again. So it's clearly very important for them and for their reputation that they don't allow that to happen. So they are tracking the personal information to identify patterns of fraud. Some that you would be more familiar with, credit card companies are doing the same thing, using detailed transaction data, and insurance companies using claims data to try to avoid claims fraud, which is something we all pay for through our insurance premiums. Now, when I sign up to some of these as a consumer, it may well be that I consent to the use of my data for some of those purposes, if not for all of them. But I think the issue, the thread that runs through these is it can be quite difficult to get the consent of a fraudster to process their data in order to catch them. And where that falls on the private sector, I think that's a balance that we also need to look at. So very final example, we look at the use of data which we can use when we aggregate it to predict and manage the movement of large groups of people. And perhaps a good example in our world today, in Europe, in a relatively small landmass that constitutes many countries, and lots of people trying to move around in that landmass, particularly by car. One of the things that we're starting to see emerging are some advanced traffic management systems that will help alleviate traffic congestion, help you get to your destination quicker. If it's going to be a delay, suggest a different route that you can take, or even suggest that you be better off diverting here and go and take a train instead. And one of the issues faced here, I think, is there's also the issue of personal data that needs to be processed, such as vehicle registration numbers. So you can look at how quickly traffic's moving by monitoring a vehicle at one point and then the same vehicle at a later point. So you get a good idea of not only where it's going but also how long it's taking. And that's another situation where it may not be easy to get the consent of everybody who's driving along that road to process their data in that way. So there are a few examples, many more like them, and I think they're reasonably compelling. But let's be balanced about this. And they're not without risk to personal data. Our view expressed in the paper is that the right regulatory framework will give a balance which will allow us in Europe to take a lead in delivering growth and delivering the services that we need. The wrong framework, though, we feel will inhibit the development of new business models. It will inhibit growth, and actually, if we really think seriously about it, it will do little to discourage the real rogues who want to set up in what we might think of perhaps as a privacy haven, well away from the attentions of European regulators, and misuse personal data. So I think the danger that we have falling into is that we get the worst of all worlds. The right environment, though, I think will be a positive benefit for us. Thank you.